I know you all can't hear me on this microphone, but we are live streaming this event, so this is for everybody that's watching this online. Thank you all for coming today, and we have a really good crowd here. We're running out of seats. We're about to outgrow this room with our lunch and learns, so really excited today about J.P. Johnson being here and the topic that he's going to be talking about. We get a lot of questions, emails, phone calls about traditional Cherokee tattoos. What were we using? What were the methods? What were the symbols? So really excited that JP's here today to talk about this. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If everybody could, please silence your phones or turn them off. The restrooms are located right behind me here to my left. So
maybe he might be running out.
But we're going to go ahead and get started, and I want to thank you all again for coming, and looks like you all missed us, so I'm excited. We took a little bit of a break there for a while, but I'm really excited to be back with doing these monthly presentations. Again, I sent around a sign-in sheet, so if you could just go ahead and sign that. It gives me a number of people that were here, and then also if you want to be added to my email list for events like this that we'll be having. All right, thanks.
Ka, Oceana Garwe, Gayeli Chase, JP Dawadon, Skiado Ligi, Klaus, Chiwoni Skasti. I'm not going to speak very good Cherokee today, but you guys can overlook it. I would appreciate it. Initially, whenever I was asked to come and talk about this, I immediately thought of a situation that happened after years and years and years of me researching tattoos and trying to figure them out and all of those kinds of things. I probably asked at least, I'd say at least 300 or 400 fluent speakers what the Cherokee word for tattoo was. And I had no luck. Nobody said anything. Nobody had a word for it. Everybody just said, well, that's just a picture, something along those lines, you know. But finally, one day, it just so happened I was sitting with a couple of master speakers, including Cora Flute and Gary Van and Doris Shell, and we were just visiting and hanging out. And I said, how do you say this? And they said, Dawatowela. You guys recognize that word, or any people in this room recognize the first part of that word? Dawato. Everybody say that. Dawato. You're talking about yourself. You're saying that's my name. Dawato. Like if I introduce myself, I'd say JP Dawato. You notice that there's a little bit more on the end of that. It has to do with something being documented or written down. This is my name as it's written. This is my identity, these things. That's what our people used to do. And when they told me this, I was floored because I'd been asking speakers over and over and over and over again forever. Over and over again, and to no avail. I'm talking the cream of the crop of speakers of Cherokee Nation, people that know their stuff, and nobody had a word for this. And when I asked them and they told me, they couldn't understand how excited I was, because when our people didn't have the syllabary, they had imagery that they used to document things. And those images were oftentimes their own tattoos. This right here says Junadolwela, their names as they're written. I'm talking about their tattoos. Let's see. Their identities were literally documented on all kinds of things. I'm talking on war clubs, weapons, you name it. they would take and make an effigy of their own selves and put that down on paper even. This is a document where a Seneca guy was actually signing an order from a trader or somebody that he was trying to trade with. And he signed it with his face. You can see he's got lines going across his chest, and a line swooping down over the front of his face, and another line coming from his nose, and a bunch of hash marks going around the top, and then something else alongside his mouth. This is a sternum tattoo. That's his chest. That's his signature. He signed his name. Essentially, when they tattooed themselves a long time ago, they were recording exactly who they were. They were recording their clans. They were recording their spiritual deities that they utilized in battle, utilized in their lives, fasted and prayed for. They were documenting their military history. Tawadowela, my tattoos. Or my name as it's written. Dejatowela, your tattoos. Dudowela, somebody else's that's not included in this conversation. Junadowela, their tattoos. This guy here, you can see those hash marks running across his face and across his forehead. He doesn't just have frown lines up there. Those are tattoos. You can see his throat is tattooed, and that's a really prominent thing amongst Cherokees specifically, having your throat tattooed. These guys are kind of famous. People sometimes refer to them as the Three Kings. There's a bunch of different tribal people, southeastern, eastern woodlands people that traveled to England, including Cherokees. These three guys are Cherokee. There were other tribes that went as well, and they all ended up happening to be people that were heavily tattooed. But you can see pretty closely that it wasn't just one or two tattoos sometimes they ended up with, but oftentimes their whole face was covered. This guy here's got quite a few. But they did these things for a reason. They did these things oftentimes because they earned them. Nowadays, people are looking for those reasons. People are wanting to tattoo themselves for the reasons that their ancestors did. Well, unless you killed 16, 17 people or something along those lines, you can't really do it for that reason. Our tattoos are not going to be utilized as they once were. There are military members that are documenting the stuff that they did while they were in the military, and that's pretty close. But to keep record of the people that you've taken in battle, or scalps you've taken, or the times that you've been wounded and things like that, is oftentimes not going to be the case. They didn't just do it on their faces, but they also did it on their bodies in other places. But for the most part, everything just about on the face was a military record. You guys have military family. You guys, some of y'all been in the military. You understand what, whenever you're wearing your uniform, or when they wore their uniforms, they have that little section right here on their uniform where they documented specifically what war what encounter they were in, what war they went to, what happened to them while they're there, what they did. All of those things are recorded right there on the lapel of their jackets and coats and things of that nature. Their military ribbons, their records of valor, so to speak. This is their recording that on their faces. They recorded that on their faces to not only show their community, but also show their enemies who they were and who they were dealing with whenever they encountered their enemies. This guy is quite possibly keeping a record, a tally of how many people that he's probably killed in battle, how many times he's been wounded. These are second and third engagements or whatever. But you see something a little different over here in the corner of his mouth. A lot of people are confused by those types of things, and they don't necessarily understand what they mean. We can't specifically say for certain that it is, but the greatest amount of information out there says that these other images that were not obviously not a record of something have something to do with either spiritual or religious practices, and something that protects them. This is something that he finds himself connected to, spiritual deity, something along those lines, probably the sun, maybe a bird, maybe both. But they oftentimes will have multiple ones on their faces and on their bodies. These are things that they kept account for, things that they showed the rest of the world that they had spiritually, the strengths that they had spiritually. I talked about the throat already. Your throat being a pretty important place as far as battle was concerned. I would imagine that if you're in hand-to-hand combat with somebody, you would more than likely want to protect this area quite a bit. It's my hypothesis only that tattooing your throat was a way to keep your head, a way to protect your throat and keep your head. And a long time ago, they took heads. Our ancestors were no timid individuals. There were probably 2 seasons throughout the year, wintertime and wartime, and they enjoyed going to war. And so it was something that most men had to do, or felt like as though they had to do, in order to gain any status within their community. But for Cherokees specifically, throat and sternum tattoos are majorly prominent. Now, all of the other southeastern tribes and also the eastern woodlands tribes all the way up into the northeastern part of the United States, Canada and New York, they did so as well. So with these images that you see sometimes, this guy is a Cherokee. You can see he's got a large circle right here across his throat, and then there's, I don't know what you would call them, sunbursts maybe going this way, having to do with something to do with the sun, something to do with spirituality, strength, all of those kinds of things. You can see with this guy here, this is a Yuchi guy. He's got a pretty neat looking throat tattoo that actually repeats the same image over and over again as it goes around his throat, and then a snake on his forehead, and something else spiritual going on here and here, probably more sunbursts on this side. And then you can also see his chest tattoo that runs down his sternum. Some people say that that's plumage, or that it represents bird feathers. Some people say that each one of those represents something that he accomplished in battle or in his life, or something along those lines. There's a lot of different speculation as to what these things specifically are. There are people, especially with the Muskogean speaking people, our Creek and Nachi and Yuchi and Choctaw, Chickasaw, Biloxi, Tunica, all of those Muskogean speaking peoples, they play a ball game, a man-to-man ball game every year. And they play it at their ceremonial grounds, and it's very, very brutal. And it's not tamed down to any degree, but you'll see those players dancing all night the night before, wearing a long red fringe across their chest. There are some people that believe that this is the original version of that, and that this fringe that they're wearing at the ball game represents this old tattoo, because they were considered skilled warriors and or ball players, same thing. when I told you that we carved effigies of ourselves into our personal items, this is a really, really good example. You see the long linear mark running across his chin. You see the sunburst or the avian or a bird's wings or something along those lines bursting out from his mouth. And then these hash marks going this way, all the way down. You can see it really defined on that one right there. So each one of these looks like a point. More than likely, those are the times that he was wounded. More than likely, that was the amount of times that he was wounded in battle, and he kept that record on his face. Then you can see others up above it. Then he did this on his war club, and they probably left that in a body or next to a body in a battle to let his enemies know who it was specifically. It was his calling card. It was saying, I did it, and basically taunting them. Oftentimes they would either leave it in the body or laying up against the body, pointed in the direction of the community that person was from that they just killed. Pretty fierce individuals, crazy stuff. This guy's Iroquois, this guy's Yuchi, and this guy's Cherokee. You'll see variation throughout the Eastern Woodlands tribes, and probably all over the United States, but the Eastern Woodlands shared designs that in common, but they oftentimes used them for subtly different reasons or in subtly different places, depending upon what they wanted to do, depending on what they wanted to represent. Aside from that, that's the end of that. I don't have too much else to show as far as that's concerned. I'm going to hand this around for everybody. The images that are in this book are copyrighted, so I didn't show it up here on the film, but everybody that's here is going to get to look at these things. These are pretty accurate Cherokee specific tattoo designs that have been recreated as flash that somebody could get tattooed on themselves. Variations of these things, you can change them, you can make them a little different, you can make them a little better, whatever you'd like. But really at this point, with the slideshow and all of that kind of thing, I would much prefer just to talk to you guys. So I'm going to open it up and kind of let you guys ask questions and things of that nature, and I'm going to hand this around for you guys to check out on your own. Are there any questions thus far?
Did they do the tattoos themselves, or did they have people that did them?
There were people that did them for them. If someone tattooed themselves, it was other people. Well, it's easy to do, but other people would question if they really did the things that they were tattooing themselves about. If I showed up and I had a big long line here in the 1720s, and all of my buddies were standing there, and I had a hash mark, you know, all of a sudden 16 or 17, 18 hash marks running across my face, they would go, who was there for these occasions when you did that, or something along those lines. So they probably had to have somebody else tattoo them. Not only that, but it was a painful process. And on the face, the majority of the tattoos that occurred on the face were oftentimes cut in with flint or a really sharp instrument, probably flint in most cases. And those designs were then rubbed with soot or cinnabar or red ochre or all kinds of, they used all kinds of stuff, whatever they could come up with, even lead later on. So yeah, they poisoned themselves with lead and probably made themselves crazy. But anyways, they would rub the design in after they had already cut it into place on the face, usually. The body, in most cases, there are several different accounts and several different means in which they did so, using old sharpened gar teeth, and pricking the design in, and then rubbing the ink in afterwards, or the soot or the pigment in afterwards. Oftentimes also they would take turkey bones. the same bones that they would use for scratchers for, you know, the ceremonial ball games and or just purification, because we scratch ourselves and as part of ceremonies, and we still do these at the ceremonial grounds anyhow. But they would sometimes take sharpened bones, and it all went from that point all the way to the point where they were actually using full-fledged, traded for sewing needles. And they were literally binding those to flat wooden surfaces and making what would be like, you know, if you've ever been to a tattoo shop, you know that they can buy tattoo needles that are already made that have, you know, multiple needles all on one long point that you put in the tattoo gun, and you run that together, and you can do wide surfaces really quickly. They were binding needles together, multiple needles together, even back then, and tattooing themselves in that regard too. Most likely, it was hand poke designs. It was not necessarily always there. The Polynesian folks did that hand tapped tattoo, but there are some Nachi folks that do say that we did that as well in the southeast. But all the documentation that I have is points to the idea that they actually would just hand poke it into the skin.
JP, whenever I grew up, I grew up in a point where there were several full-blood communities around where we were.
Wahila.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of tattooing in those communities.
It didn't die.
So, is there any kind of documentation from, say, my childhood, which I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but back to maybe removal where tattooing was mentioned or existed?
I've not found anything, and if you ever run across some of it, I'll rob, steal, and cheat to get a copy of it.
But it's so prevalent because we saw the kids from Bell, kids from Kenwood. The tattooing was so consistent on their forearms and their hands. And,
It never really died. It never really died completely. I mean, initially the missionaries, when they came amongst us, there were a couple of things that they were like instrumentally trying to snuff out. One of them was the ball game, because they didn't like us being like mostly naked, and the other was tattooing. That was something that was really, really majorly frowned upon, and so those things seemingly died completely, but they didn't actually die completely. And as with all cultures, even, you know, just military members, the tattooing in the military runs way deep, all the way back into the times when sailors were first going amongst, you know, Polynesians and things of that nature. So tattooing never really completely died out in our communities, and even now with a resurgence of traditional tattoos or traditional tattoo designs, I guess, there still exists a hefty amount of tattooing that, you know, doesn't necessarily have to be old school. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. I mean, how many guys you guys know that have NDN tattooed on their arm? You know, I know a bunch of those guys, but we have a never really lost it completely. It was just something that kind of the traditional reasoning behind it may have changed. But with that said, within the communities that you just mentioned, there's a, what would you say, a rough element of young folks, tough guys in the community that end up with these tattoos. The people sometimes will marginalize these young groups of people. I don't believe we should do that. I think we should embrace them. We should embrace them and empower them and give them some positive influence, and let them know that their community pride is important, and to take care of that community is important, and that's pretty much what warriors were a long time ago. They were people that were protecting their communities. So with the rough and tumble young folks of Kenwood or anywhere, My family's from Rocky Mountain. If our old people wrap their arms around them and say, "That's all right, you come with us," it may just be that we reconnect that old system, reconnect things and change them the way they were. They get me on my soapbox and I'll preach forever, but yeah, tattooing, it's never really died out completely. Any other questions?
Some of the older symbols, like the bifork and trifork, the lightning bolt, can you kind of maybe explain the meanings of those?
The lightning bolt, some people say, has to do with oration, being an orator, a great speaker. That was a prideful, an important thing with our people, having lightning bolt tattooed right here out the side of your mouth. Lightning has to do with medicine.
Am I correct in telling my visitors to the studio that would be kind of like a calling card? You could tell that he was a storyteller or a good speaker by looking?
That would oftentimes be the case, or also it could be simply that he was he believes that he's utilizing the spiritual strengths of certain kinds of medicine when speaking, when singing, when doing anything of public nature, oftentimes, and going to war, I suppose. But yeah, definitely.
What about the bifork, trifork eye?
Some people say that represents the one that you're talking about, one that just went right over the eye.
It comes down to 2 points or 3 points.
Some people say that that's like a falcon eye, or harnessing the skills or the abilities of that particular bird, and or that great big mythical hawk. Okay, what does anybody remember what that's called? Dog-used? Flanderwald, that's it. So either or, yeah, definitely much.
What about the dots in the chin?
My dots? Hey. I'm one of the, yeah, I probably have been in that many. No, there are multiple reasons that I got these tattooed on my chin, and some of them I keep to myself. But one of them is one that I tell people often, because I get asked. I mean, you can't not get asked. Have tattoos on your face and people not ask you questions. So a long time ago, what about the time of statehood? We had roughly 26, 27 up to 30 maybe Cherokee ceremonial grounds. That's a lot. That's a lot of communities that had dances, medicine, ceremonies, open use of medicine, tobacco, all of that kind of stuff. Speeches made by old men telling us the way to be and all of that kind of stuff. It's a lot of communities that have that. Now there's about 6. So that's an awful lot of communities that have lost those things. They're not completely lost. Some people just travel from one community to the next and go dance over somewhere else. But used to, just about every community had a ceremonial fire, and they had a ceremonial ground, a stomp ground. This tattoo on my face is actually a promise I made to myself whenever I started working for Cherokee Nation about 10 years ago, that by the time I'm an old man, I'm getting close, there'll be 16. I'll be pushing our culture, traditions, language, everything so hard in the community like a drug dealer. Pushing it, giving it to those kids, giving them themselves, so much so that by the time I'm an old man, there'll be 16 ceremonial grounds. These things will be revived in this community, that community. I want them to live. So it's something I have to look at every day, this promise on my face. I have to get up and wipe the sleep out of my eye and look in the mirror and remember that I promised myself I wouldn't quit.
I saw an image of this somewhere in the past. I've seen an image in a book somewhere that's that was really, I knew that you had them, so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what the reason was.
I was in a book. There was a book written by Lars Krutik about tattooing, but there's been lots of people that have done this. For Polynesian folks, women would tattoo themselves specifically in this area, or also in the coastal region over near in California. A lot of those tribes over there have a chin tattoo specifically for women. Cherokees and other southeastern people not only tattooed their chins, but that's probably about the spot where it began. Then they would tattoo themselves further, oftentimes the jawline, you name it.
I've seen dots.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies' eyes.
Yep.
Same thing.
Same thing. They oftentimes, there were Cherokee women that went to war. So there were women that sometimes could document these things on their faces. But most of the time, these things were showing their status within their community. Maybe oftentimes showing how many children they had, or how many husbands they may have had. Cherokee women, they could have as many as they wanted. So at least a long time ago. Well, maybe so still yet today. Some of y'all laughed. But yeah, they would document. There was usually something to do with them in their community. Women did tattoo themselves, their bodies, but there's less things written about those. The problem with just about everything that exists in written form is simply this: they didn't care. Those white settlers that came amongst us, those European folks that came amongst us, the people that were documenting and writing things down, they didn't want to talk to women. They wanted to talk to men. They would have learned a lot more had they talked to the women. They probably would have gotten a little more accurate information, because the guys like to mess with them a little bit and tell them stories just to play with them. But the women, there would have been a lot more information out there had they spoken with them more. So there's less documentation about the reasoning behind women's tattoos. But the majority of the oral history that I know, from asking old folks around here, some of them talk about the reason that they did that was to demonstrate their standing within the community. So, whoa.
Standing in the community, I was going to say about Nachi chin tattoos. They say that's when you have a responsibility that you can't get rid of when putting it on the face.
Yeah, and it goes right in line with my big freaking promise to myself. All right. Uh-huh. It's a sunburst. It's like the sun is a pretty powerful element within our communities. Some people will argue that the ceremonial fire is connected to the sun, or the sun is, that the ceremonial fire maybe is a physical representation of the power behind the sun. So images of the sun on your body is like referencing literally the strength of the sun, the power of the sun. The sun does all kinds of stuff for us. Be quite hard to live in this world if the sun didn't exist. So the sun's a super important thing, and that ceremonial fire is like a scaled down or little version of that. So tattooing celestial things like stars, the sun, all of those kinds of things oftentimes is going to be pretty important, and that's what it is for me. Doug Hughes.
So I was looking at tattoos for women as well, and what I've noticed is I've seen the women, but then there would be bands, like just lines around the arms, like both sides.
Yep.
So what's the meaning of that?
Some of that may be simply decoration. But with that said, I've got a buddy who's Miccosukee Seminole, and when he was 15, 16 years old, somewhere around there. They tattooed him in Florida, just with one single band around his arm, and he said that that was something that he had to do when he got named. And while most Cherokees in this area, most Cherokees, I guess even in the Eastern Band, believe that you only get one name in your life. When you're born, you know, your grandma or your grandpa or somebody, the oldest female relative in your family probably names you. It changes. I think that our people gained more than one name throughout their lives. And now if it's something that could be applied to women, it's possible that those women that had bands, each time they put a different band was because of some life-altering situation. Maybe they almost died. Maybe they went to war with the men. Maybe they almost died during childbirth. Maybe they had a sickness and had a dream or something along a lot of different things, reasons behind it. So, but these things I can only hypothesize and speculate. I can't tell you specifically that that was the case, but it's highly likely.
Going back to the tools for tattooing, in 2002 with the University of Arkansas, I was fortunate enough to assemble a Cadoan tattooing kit.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in a field lab at an archaeological dig,
Mm-hmm.
and when it came in, and they were...
Look like push pins, isn't it?
Yeah, they were no bigger around than this lid, just
Mm-hmm.
for your thumb, but they had a needle point steel
Mm-hmm.
on them, and we found 6. There could have been more, but there were at least 6.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite amazing to see how consistent these were hand manufactured. I mean, they didn't have a press to punch them out,
Right.
but they were very consistent in size and weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just pushed them in there. Yeah, hand poke stuff is probably the most accurate way that we did it in the Southeast. Go ahead.
Last December, I was in Palm Springs,
Uh-huh.
and I met this young lady. She was younger than me, I'm sure, probably about 24, and she had tattooing here. And her tribe had a traditional revitalization that they were doing. So there was a handful of women who went through all this. They did it in a traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm Choctaw. So Choctaw Nation, they're not. We have 10 tattoos also. They're not anywhere near this type of revitalization. Is the Cherokee Nation type of interested?
As an entity of it, in and of itself, no. Am I looking to do so? Yes.
I'm going to put my name on a list.
All right.
Give me a call when you get ready.
All right.
It's a commercial.
I have every intention of doing so. I just want to line everything out specifically as accurately and or as best as I can. We cannot tattoo ourselves with the old imagery for the exact same reasons anymore. We can't. We can, however, utilize those images to suit our own worldview, to suit the way things are, to suit our lives, and to represent what we want, essentially. It would be nice if we lived exactly the way that we did a long time ago, but we don't. You know, you get mad at somebody, you just go whoop them and take note of it, you know, and nobody takes you to jail. That'd be really cool in my case. But at the same time, you know, we live in this modern world, so we have to things have changed. Just like our language isn't exactly the same as it once was. It can't be, because it's alive. It's alive. Sanskrit, that's a dead language. Aramaic, it's dead. Cherokee language ain't dead. In our tattooing, we revived that. It ain't dead either. Southeastern tattooing. So if we reawaken it, if we perpetuate it, and we do so on our own terms in the way that we want, it can be a good thing. I believe that tattooing a long time ago was ceremonial, whereas it wasn't necessarily, somebody walks into a shop and picks something off the wall and says, I want that because that looks cool. It's these things were done for these old reasons, but they were done specifically, I believe, with medicine, with ceremonies, with fasting, with prayer, all of those kinds of things. So I'll get my ducks in a row, and that's what I'll be doing. And it won't be I'm trying to make money off of you. It'll be I'm doing it because I want people to do it.
There are other women that want it too.
Yeah.
Like I have sisters who are just like, and we're young.
Yeah.
So, well, one of my questions, like I've wanted it for a really long time, but one of my questions is like, what do you run to as far as policy? What about your employer's policy? How does that, like, even in Cherokee Nation?
With my tattoos, nobody never told me nothing. I just showed up. The way that I was already working for Cherokee Nation at the time when I first got these dots on my chin. The rest of the tattoos that I've gotten after the fact or whatever, nobody's ever said anything to me. I work in a cultural department of Cherokee Nation, so that helps because working in the cultural department, I can say, well, this is cultural. So nobody's ever given me any flack for it, but a lot of people in other areas of Cherokee Nation, that might be something that's frowned upon, but it is not. There's no, I don't think there's anything in HR that says that you cannot have tattoos or anything. I don't think there's anything that says any of that.
But when you start developing any curriculum or in that kind of stuff, you'll get all those.
Oh yeah?
You start putting it in writing, you'll get it.
You never know.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns, or just stuff you want to know? What's up?
I have a question. How did you choose the tattoo on your neck?
It's the most heathen thing I could think of. No, I'm kidding. Everybody was like, do I believe him or not? It is. It's pretty heathen. There are old stories. There's lots of old stories that talk about some of the tattoos that I get. The information behind those are pretty accurate information, and I know exactly what they mean because they're from old shell fragments or gorget designs and things of that nature, and artwork, stuff that wasn't necessarily tattooed at one time but was definitely important imagery that our people utilized both spiritually, religiously, ceremonially, all that kind of stuff. And this this hand with an eye in the center of it is something that's really, really super prominent throughout the Southeast and Eastern Woodlands tribes. For us, this eye in the center of this hand, or this hand, represents the hand of the Thunderer. The hand of the Thunderer is a spiritual being or a celestial being, whatever you want to call it. But this person, the Thunderer, originally was the first Cherokee man. His name was Kanate, and then he became the Thunderer later on. And it was the Thunderer that defeated a lot of I don't want to say evil, but powerful things, dangerous things. So this hand is often depicted with a couple of snakes tattooed around it, or drawn around it, that are tied in knots, symbolizing the idea that the Thunderer defeated those rattlesnakes and/or uktana, whichever one you want to call it. But it's like saying good prevailing over evil, so to speak. At our ceremonial grounds, oftentimes there's a medicine that people utilize at the ceremonial grounds that's sometimes referred to as the seven thunders. Lightning and thunder go hand in hand, and if it's the seven thunders, then that's medicine that's been been or has the qualities and the strength of the Thunderer. So in a way, it's like tattooing a symbol for medicine on your throat. In a way, it's like tattooing, good over evil, good over bad, all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose even in this day and age, maybe it's just a way for me to keep my head. I don't know. Any other questions?
Literally or figuratively. You know that as you grow old doing this project or whatever, that hand's gonna close up.
I don't care. I've heard people say, I've heard women say, oh, well, I don't want to get a tattoo on my belly because when I get older, it's gonna not be so perfect. And I always go, so what? Are you going to be showing everybody your belly when you get older anyways? No. So go ahead and just get it anyways.
Ear gauges.
Ear gauges. This is pretty prominent in just popular culture right now today. You see a lot of young people with this kind of stuff. I didn't do it because I thought it was cool that they were doing it. I did it because it's the kind of the closest thing you can get to the old style of splitting your earlobes that our ancestors used to do a long time ago. They actually would take and cut around the rim of the ear all the way up to this point and wrap that all with copper wire and have big hoops that hung off the back sides of their ears, or sometimes tie those together behind their heads. But these stretched gauges is kind of a modernized, close version of that. And that's the reason that I did it. The reasoning that they did it a long time ago, I think that it had to do with status. I think that it had to do with showing off, being flashy, and also doing this. You go into war and you got earlobes that stick out off the top and back sides of your ear, and you come back and those suckers aren't ripped out. In hand-to-hand combat, you're pretty scosty, right? You're a pretty tough guy if you show up and you still got those things are still intact. On top of that, there is one elder that I've talked to that said that it also had to do with heightening one's hearing by. You ever try to sneak up on a rabbit? Do it. Try it one time. See if you can sneak up on a rabbit. You can't because he's got big ears, right? He's going to hear you. Well, maybe they may. This was just something somebody said that quite possibly they stretched their earlobes or made their ears bigger like that so that they could heighten their sense of hearing, so to speak.
The disclaimer is on tattoos and ear piercing or ear stretching both that always means that. Well, it doesn't.
Yep.
People always ask me, well, you've got multiple earrings in your ears. How come you don't stretch? Because my family's never stretched. We always have 3 or 5 holes. That's it, not 4 holes. And so that's my family thing. It's not.
Mm-hmm. It can be specific to one clan. It can be specific to one community, one tribal group, or one entity within a community. The warrior society had something different. There were warriors that were tattooed a certain way, where the chiefly folks, the peacekeeping folks, were not tattooed the same way. So there can be variation from tribe to tribe, clan to clan, all of those kinds of things. So trying to hammer this stuff down to being one specific group or one specific way or whatever is kind of like searching for that needle in a haystack. The best thing we can do, unless somebody stumbles across a remarkable document or something historical, whatever, and find some really cool information anytime soon, we're at best speculating as to the exact reasons on everything.
Basically, they did it the way we do it now for what appeals to us.
Yeah, I mean, it can represent things, important to you. This design right here, that's old. That's really old, and you'll find it in shells and gorgets and things like that, and so on and so forth. And people have a lot of different beliefs as to what that represents. Some people say that represents all of creation. Some people say that represents the Four Mothers Society or Four Mothers Nation. Some people say that represents, I had it drawn down to basically one word. Nigarwa, that means everything, right? Nikola, that's always, like an infinity symbol. I've had people say that these two loops that loop interchange with each other represents the first man and the first woman. So it's possible that this represents the union of the first man and first woman and the beginning of creation of people, so to speak. There's a lot of different things that so this could be used as a romantic tattoo, you know, I love you, honey. Whatever you want to do. Go ahead.
Back to your ears.
Yeah.
You know, I was told somewhere back in time that the women, you know, you see pictures of women that's been etched in the books, what have you, but the men always seem to have multiple piercings, what have you, and larger gauges, whatever. The men sometimes wore more bling than the women did.
Well, think about birds.
So, is it not? Yeah.
Think about birds, specifically birds. The most, if you go back a generation or so, the vast majority of the Cherokee names that existed for boys, most of the time ended up being birds. Then you go down through our history and you talk about during wartime and things of that nature, and the tattoos sometimes representing birds, the plumage and all of that kind of stuff, ending up being something that they represent. You know, think about that gobble that those men make at the ceremonial grounds whenever they hoop and holler around. That gobble is called Uwe Luke. That means somebody died. And they would scalp somebody and gobble like a turkey. They still do this at ceremonial grounds. So the imitating a bird is a big thing. And what do birds do? Birds, the male birds are really pretty feathers. Female birds, they don't have to have really pretty feathers. The boys are going to chase them regardless. But the male birds have to be pretty. They strut around and show off their feathers and all that kind of stuff. It's very much the same thing, and everything that is kind of influenced by those kinds of ideas.
Tattoos, when we were talking about those, did they not maybe use like fish bones and things? And those
Our teeth, fish bones, you name it.
Finished pieces like this, there would have been like whelps, wouldn't there? Like scars.
If they cut them in specifically on their face, yes, they did actually end up raising and scarring a bit. Even now, even if you get a modern tattoo now, sometimes you can feel the texture of that ink kind of raised on your skin a little bit. So even with this modern, modernized, technologically advanced form of tattooing, you still end up with a little bit of a scar to it. You cut your face with flint and rub powder into that until it festers, and they got sick. And this is what so some people say that this is why they fasted. They fasted because they knew they was going to get sick. Some people say they fasted because they knew when they got sick they needed to be in a spiritual place to do so. That's why I believe these tattoos, if we do them the old way or try to revive the old way of implementation, that we need to do it ceremonially, so that that person isn't just getting an image tattooed on them, but they're doing something that their ancestors did.
Had a man and a woman come to the studio some years ago, and he was a great big guy. They come up on this big motorcycle. And he came and he had the torn on t-shirt thing, and he was just covered in tattoos, but they weren't ours. And anyway, he came in and they were looking at my masks that were displayed in there, and he said, well, what is this right here? And I'm telling him that these are some of our ancient designs that I've used to use as tattoos on my masks. And I told him, I said that the Cherokees were among the first that ever wore tattoos. And I turned and looked at him, I said, so what you're doing? I said, we've already done that.
That's new, man.
Been there.
That's new stuff. Very new. Yeah, that's true. How are we doing on time? We're good? Any more questions, comments, or concerns? What up?
You mentioned that, different communities might have different interpretations, different tribes, different locations, maybe even in different times,
Uh-huh.
200 years later, the same symbol might mean something different. In today's world, people get tattoos for self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's clear that there were probably some individual concepts of self-expression even among our ancestors. But you pointed out earlier that that a person didn't get tattooed alone because it was a community thing. So to me, that seems to be one of the differences between the modern tattoo trend and our traditional.
Absolutely. Yeah, if I'm driving down the road and I just get wild hair and decide I want to get a tattoo, I just pull over and there's a shop and hook me up, Joe, and I can do it all by myself and nobody has to be there with me. But that makes a lot of sense too, to do things as a group or do things collectively as a community. It's important. Absolutely.
You need to do this more often.
Yeah.
JP, have you looked at any old photographs from the 1800s to see, like in detail?
I try to find some, but I don't have.
They all wear long sleeves.
Yeah, they're all buttoned down like this. Who would have thought that maybe underneath all of those seminary gowns, they're all tattooed underneath. You never know.
Good job.
All right.